China says great uncertainty prompting it to drop that GDP target. I mean, how will it chart its economic policy from here then?
Well, this is potentially good news for China if it represents a real change in economic policy. The fact that they dropped the GDP growth target is a good thing if it means that they really intend to let the sustainable demand, which is consumption, exports, and private sector investment, drive growth. But if they've only dropped it temporarily while they try to figure out the full impact of the pandemic, and then later select an implicit target that relies heavily on non-productive spending on infrastructure and real estate, as it has in the past, then this really doesn't change anything. And any GDP growth target, implicit or explicit, that exceeds the real underlying growth rate of the economy is also automatically a credit growth target.
This policy is also important in terms of how China aims to address the issue of unemployment, millions, tens of millions of newly out of jobs people in China, and it has said that it will create 9 million jobs versus 11 million before. Is there concern that perhaps, I guess, unemployment could be the new crisis in China?
Well, I think that's almost certainly what they are most worried about, and particularly urban unemployment, more so than unemployment among migrant workers, because many of them, if they don't have jobs, return to their farms, return to the rural areas. But my guess is that they're going to focus very heavily on urban unemployment and on measures that are more geared towards raising employment. So, for example, supporting consumption, because the consumption sector, the services sector, is a very big employee of people. So I think that's where they're going to focus much of their firepower on. And we've been hearing this for a while now, that unemployment was the thing that worried them the most.
The stimulus that we have seen so far, is that enough to address the issue? I mean, just today it extended its loan relief to smaller businesses till March 2021. And we know that SMEs pretty much, I guess, employ most of the Chinese.
Yeah, it's a real problem because much of the data that we have suggests that the impact of COVID-19 has been worse on small businesses, on the self-employed. The rich and the sort of middle and upper middle class haven't been too badly affected. But it's really the bottom end of society that has been most affected. And, of course, that's where much of the employment is. So, you know, we really don't yet have all of the data, in part because we don't know if the pandemic is completely over or not. But to the extent that it is, we've started to see some recovery in activity. But if you look at the different types of activity, recovery in sort of large companies, et cetera, has been much swifter. And even though it's not been very swift, but it's been much swifter than recovery in the sort of smaller business area, the self-employed, things like that. Restaurants are still pretty empty, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still trying to figure out the full impact, but it's hard to imagine that there's not going to be a significant employment impact, once all of this is behind us.
Michael, Rich in Hong Kong, jobs are very important, and from an ideological perspective as well, because if they don't have the jobs, it's essentially breaking that sort of compact, isn't it, that is implicit in the deal the Communist Party has done with its people, in the sense, stay out of politics and we will give you ever-rising prosperity.
Yeah, a system like that of China is much less flexible, and it's much more difficult to adjust to significant institutional changes, for example, in unemployment, which is why I think the government has made it very clear that that's the bulk of their focus. Now, I think one of the problems that we're seeing here is the division of responsibilities. I think the central government would like local governments to play a much more active role in relieving domestic unemployment and boosting domestic consumption. The problem is local governments are indebted up to their eyebrows. There's really not much room for them to significantly to increase debt. Many of them are already really struggling with their debt burdens. So I'm very curious to see how this conflict resolves itself, whether the central government will play a much bigger role in unemployment alleviation, or whether they'll continue to try to focus much of the cost of unemployment alleviation on local governments. Because if it's the latter, I think we're running into some pretty serious debt constraints.
Yeah, absolutely. Nearly just over $500 billion worth of local government special bonds designed to stimulate those regions. But, Michael, the other aspect is, and you can't ignore it, it's China targeting Hong Kong here, saying they're going to perfect the territory's security law. Surely they've got a lot more going on their plate right now than get involved with this now.
Yes, and they're perhaps not unrelated. I mean, one of the things that seems pretty obvious, and not just in China, you see it in the U.S., you see it in Europe, you see it elsewhere, is that as the domestic economy gets tougher and tougher, there's more and more tendency to turn to nationalism as a way of addressing some of these domestic problems. And I don't think China is any different than anyone else there. So I suspect that geopolitical issues are probably going to become more important, particularly given that this is an election year in the U.S. and there's plenty of room for fights over there. But I generally see this as a response to a bad economy.